Well, thank you, Christian, for coming on. We're really excited to kind of deep dive into your career and stuff. I think your path is probably going to resonate with a lot of students who kind of want to take more of a, less traditional path into, finance, more on the venture capital and tech side. So I guess just to kind of start us off, for anyone who doesn't know you or Panache Ventures, why don't you give us kind of a quick snapshot of who you are, what's your background, what do you do?
Yeah, no, great to be here, and thanks so much for having me. So, really quickly, my background: I studied economics and minored in computer science at McGill University, with minor in entrepreneurship. Spent 4 years there. In that time, I spent the first 2 years focusing on, building startups. So, I was part of few founding teams of startups based out of New York, SF, and Singapore, mostly doing non-technical work in growth, go-to-market, ops, and product. After that, I discovered the VC space through talking to a lot of investors in the space, and I was really interested in the other side of the table, as I call it. And what was super interesting for me was being able to learn from investors and understand what it takes to actually allocate capital in this asset class that is really interesting, and it competes against the S&P, against gold, minerals, and so you want to understand, like, how is this actually an asset class that actually delivers ROI for investors. And so I was very curious, and also very curious to see how investors pick and choose to scale these companies. After that, found my way into VC. I worked at funds like Front Row Ventures, Inovia Capital, White Star Capital, mostly doing pre-seed all the way to Series B investments. That was a great experience. Most of the companies I've invested into the state are actually in enterprise software, and so they range in verticals from cybersecurity to future of work to digital health. And I've also done some more medical device heavy businesses at Front Row Ventures back in my time there. A bit about Panache, where I worked at now. We're a 100 million fund, investing out of our second fund. We're the only pan-Canadian purely pre-seed and seed fund in Canada. So we have offices in the four provinces, in Ontario, Quebec, Calgary, and British Columbia. I focus on our investments on the East Coast as an analyst on the investment team. My focuses have been largely enterprise software, but my recent investments have been in actually in spaces that are not enterprise software, which have been really interesting, in frontier tech, as I so call it, in quantum computing. And so that's where we focus on. We do enterprise software in different verticals, all the way from fintech, cyber, digital health, and we also have done full stack in the AI space besides frontier models, so everything from the inference layer all the way to application layer we look at. So that's a bit about Panache and myself.
Very cool. I kind of want to dig into your very kind of earliest beginnings. So you're from Singapore.
Yep.
Maybe just tell me a little bit about, you served for, I believe, 2 years
Yeah, that's correct.
before even going into university. Can you just tell me about, that experience, and then how that translated into, your discipline and your career path choices?
Yeah, so for context, like if you're from Singapore, you have to do 2 years of national conscription or national mandatory military service. And so, yeah, I did that for 2 years. You're 4 months in the infantry in basic military training or BMP. You get thrown into a few verticals. You're either going to be, in the army as a firefighter or as a police officer. So I was put in the army. At the time, I was put within a transport as a transport operator in the artillery battalion. It was really interesting. Got to learn a lot about operating vehicles, as well as how to understand artillery positions through vehicle positioning and gun towing. So those were really cool experiences. It was also during COVID, and so I also was an ambulance operator as well, working, ferrying the soldiers up and down hospitals and bases, which was really fun as well. So the lesson there, I think I would say, is, I think, I made the most out of it, and the lessons you learn really are through like discipline, but most importantly, realizing that like time is so sacred, because in those 2 years, it was like I don't have a choice, and then realizing when you're in university, when you're in high school, when you're working, even though you're like stuck to a particular school you're at, or a major you're studying, or a job you're doing, you actually have more freedom than you realize. And so post grad, I think I took full agency of my life, as I like to say it, and kind of believed I could pave my own way, because I was such in a constricted environment before. So yeah, sums it up. But that was it was a great experience. Don't regret it. I think looking back, it was hard, but I think nothing great comes from things that are easy, as I like to kind of call it.
Awesome, man. One of the other things I kind of dug into is you had a lot of different kind of scrappy startup roles, a lot of side projects. How did that really teach you a lot that maybe you couldn't just learn inside a venture capital kind of structured internship?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of my internships were like probably unstructured. Like even the funds I worked at were like maximum like 2-3 billion AUM. So it is big, but like probably that was the most structured learnings I've had. Like I've never worked at a big four, never applied for a corporate job, never done banking consulting. So I think the startup world for me, what was interesting. So first off, like I got the roles purely through like grinding out outbound and just reaching out to founders. Like they don't post, they actually didn't never posted these roles. They actually made them for me based on like what they were looking at and what they were seeing me kind of produce, either like content wise or just like kind of being in the space. And so what I learned from there, I think unstructured environments give you the perspective of, agency. And I think what I learned from there is like, no one's going to handhold you to week. They're going to give you very broad guidelines of what the business needs to achieve. And you need to go and figure it out from whatever angle you want. And so I think these startup roles have helped me, one, given me the potential, but also the position to have agency within such a small firm, which I think leverages a lot of like discipline that I learned in the army, but also it made me like a lot more creative and just very conviction driven rather than just like sitting down and waiting for my boss to tell me what to do. So obviously there's a part of that, but I think you have more agency in that. And so, whereas a VC, I think depending on how big the firm is, I think at Panache, it's a very small firm. We're like 12 people max. And so it's very startup-y. I would say like we're on our second fund. It's still emerging, still calls an emerging manager for lack of a better term. And so I think most of it is really like being scrappy, figuring out processes, bringing deals 0 to 1. So I think a lot of that is also reflected. But I think these two things are very different from working very corporate roles, which I don't have experience in for sure.
Very cool. I love how you're always kind of putting down the path in front of you. Kind of on that note, I see you're trying to build a community in Montreal. Maybe tell us a little bit about 555.
Yeah, no, for sure. So 555 started out of an Instagram group chat, and it was actually inspired from people in Toronto that were building really cool communities out west and out east of downtown. And coming back from one of those events, I was super inspired that you could create really cool events that are not like typical networking, like I said, events. And by all means, these are great events, but I think I wanted to put a different spin on it. And so inspired by kind of the creative events that were happening in Toronto, I came back to Montreal and I decided to host just an event of cool people around my circle. And so the lowest hanging fruit at the time was like, why don't we just kind of give the platform for people to just talk about what they want? And so we called it 555, which stands for 5 minutes to present, 5 slides, and 5 questions to kind of ask the audience. And so we started there. We started in November of last year. We've done like over 12 events now. We've collaborated with different startups. Most notably, I think Shopify has been our most famous per se, like collaborator, and shout out to Harley as well. The president of Shopify has been super supportive in helping us, organize, distribute the event, and just supporting us online as well. And so, yeah, like that's kind of it, man. It's just really a cool place for people to hang out, to demo not just projects, but passion projects, but just topics they're interested in. I really believe like, we're not here to, be like a pitch competition thing. We're just here to give people the platform to talk about important things they care about. And what I think happens through that is natural conversions of interesting people meeting, becoming friends, becoming co-founders. And so actually in our community, we've had like 2 or 3 people that have come to our events, and I'm not saying it's because of us they've got into these programs, but they went on to go and get into YCs, A16, to pair, and so I think it's really interesting to see kind of people coming out of the people that come out of the events, and are influenced at least by the people around them. So that's kind of the premise of 555, and we're looking to keep scaling and hopefully get a potential permanent venue for us.
That's sick, man. Where do you kind of see 555 going in maybe 3 years from now?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. Like I'd love for it to be borderless. I'd love to go into like other provinces as well. Biggest thing for me, I think, with 555 is like it's like really people driven. It's beyond the founders who made it, and I think for us to scale is like we have to make sure like we're not going too fast because it loses a bit of its essence of what the project really means. And so for me, like it's always been like thinking of like months by months. It's like, what do people like? What do people not like? And so I think of it incrementally as growth through different events. And so thinking about like, what did we do wrong last time? How could we improve it for the next iteration? But I think to give you the short-term answer, that's all 3 years. Like I'd love for this to be like a physical home where people can come co-work, people can come meet people on a more regular basis. I think if we can have one of our variables be very consistent, or constant rather, and I think having a permanent space would just, I think, make it a lot better for organizing, but also people would just realize that 555 is not just events company. We're also just a place where people can make their ideas real. So that's kind of it.
Awesome, man. And to bring it a little bit back to your kind of earlier career and how you kind of got in, for the students out there, what types of things should you be like doing? What type of mindset should you have if you're a first year and you really want to go and break into VC, and work in that space?
Yeah, that's a good question. A few things. I think VC is broad in the sense you could do like growth equity, you could go earlier stage. I'm speaking more from the earlier side. I've
Mhm.
only done up to Series A and B, and so can't speak of like later stage, like closer to private equity kind of roles where I think those are recruited based on more technical financial profiles. So you might have to like do a bit of investment banking or equity research and have that more technical background quantitatively to break into those growth roles. So I won't be talking about that. I think for the earlier roles, a few things that come up to mind. I think first is like really understanding your why, and even auditing if you should go into venture. And the reason I say that is because I think a lot of people think this is like the new sexy job of like 8 years ago if you were a banker or like a product manager. I really think it's not. I think it's the opposite. I think it's like it's a very demanding job, and there's always things to do. And it's not a 9 to 5. It's really like grindy hours in a different way than banking, right? And so for me, it's like you really need to like understand like why you want to go into VC. It reflects when you interview, and if you just have a very popped out response to like why venture, like people are going to realize. So for example, my real reason was like I love startups and I want to be exposed to as many as possible, not just one. And so that's why venture made a lot of sense because I have exposure to all these different companies. Another thing I think about is as a student thinking of bringing to venture, I would also broaden my options. So like I have like a few fund that you would want to work at, develop those relationships early. It is very like basic advice, but my like realistic advice is like there's only so few funds, very few analyst roles, and a very few will hire junior. I will say on the macro trend side, there's more and more funds betting on younger students. The issue is you just have to be the best out of that group, and they need to think of you first. So I would almost encourage maybe if the mass population of students like the 99 percentile, think about like maybe working at a startup first, getting operational experience, doing something entrepreneurial, working at an innovation lab within a big corporate. That could be also cool. But just try to stick within innovation startups, and that will open the door later to venture. My last advice here is like, don't think that venture is the only way to be involved in startups. There's so many roles. You could work in an incubator, accelerator, operator. You could work, building a startup. You could like be part of one. You could, there's so many ways to be involved in innovation in startups. You don't have to necessarily be an investor. And so that's why I go back to my first advice is like understand your why, because your why will dictate where you go. And so if your passion is really startups, man, maybe VC doesn't make sense. Like for me, it was like I love startups. I could see myself in venture, but to be transparent, like I was not thinking of going to Panache full time. I didn't. I graduated, in June, and Panache came to me in January, so in February. So I was literally prepared to join a startup in Toronto. So it's kind of like how I think about it. At least, like I wouldn't optimize too much on that. But if you want like specific advice to like break into venture, like there's a few podcasts that some of your audiences might be able to listen to. That's on my profile, pinned on my LinkedIn, and you can kind of like listen to those, and I give more tactical advice about breaking into venture.
Awesome. Awesome. I guess to go a little bit more detail into your experiences through those internships, what did that look like? Are you helping source deals or you working on more the kind of diligence period? Like where are you actually on the deal?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'd say like internship wise, like it depends the fund, but most of the time they'll be kind of pairing you with like an associate to work with, and so that will be your mentor for the internship. The internship is kind of like two parts. Like the first part is like of your deliverables. Like at the end of the 4 months term or 8 months term, you're probably going to come up with a research project, and so that's like maybe deep diving into a specific vertical or specific space and doing a lot of like less like more research based tasks and interviewing people and doing market mapping. So it's really like more of a thought-provoking, thought leadership role in writing those memos in terms of where the fund thinks they could invest in the space. Second part of it is really like early stage, like you're either sourcing deals on the outbound side or you're kind of taking deals inbound. And so these are deals that come down from partners. You're going to kind of go through them. You're going to analyze them. You're going to kind of work with the associate to kind of dissect the deal. And so most of the time you think about a deal, there's so many components. There's like, obviously you got to go through the data room. So that's like kind of like, you need to do like a market sizing, a TAM analysis. You need to go through the product analysis. You need to analyze the tailwinds, the market. You need to kind of do, maybe look at their models and their three financial statements. And so you'll probably be as an intern, like exposed to like maybe one or two of these, and then the associate will kind of lead most of the diligence. And so he or she might be, hey, like I want you to just like give me help me do like a first draft of the TAM or the market map or the competitor analysis. And so you'll be kind of given like just in one part of the diligence. As an analyst full time, you're like at now where I'm at, it's like very like 0 to 1, and like I'm pretty much responsible for leading like the deal from nothing to whatever it becomes. So that's kind of, I would say, like the main thing. So that's how I would break up profiles and kind of what you'd be doing as an intern as well. So
Very cool. And at Panache, after you invest in one of these deals, what sort of support are you giving to these startup founders after that check hits?
yeah, it's a great question. I think for us, we take an interesting approach. Like first, we don't take board seats. I think we're hands-on when we need to, and we kind of come to work with a startup as like a sparring or a thought partner. We're not here to like restrict you and tell you that you hire someone without our permission, that you can't do decisions without our permission. We're very permissions driven, and so that means that gives startups the freedom. They're the experts in the space. We bet on them early, and so we're here when we need you to help. And so most of our, I think, things is like our fund is like a lot based on like angel investors and family offices. And so one of the things we do is like we kind of make introductions for you in the space to get your first pilots, to get your first clients, to get advisors that can help you on the board. And as well as, I think most importantly, to introduce you to talent that we could hire to help you hire and introduce you to people that might help. I think if I were to summarize it even further, what Panache really offers is literally a partner to help you raise those rounds fast and at good valuations, and making sure we're doing it properly. And so one of the big things we offer is we have fundraising boot camps for C to Series A. And so we're really hands-on to help our companies find PMF, but also just really getting them to Series A. When Series A comes, there are going to be bigger investors that come in, and so that's when we're less hands-on. But from pre-C to Series A, we're very hands-on to help you. So we have like bi-weekly calls with our founders who we just invested in, and make sure that we are helping them hit their milestones, be it through the strategic side of things or the more broader things overall for the company. So that's how I would sum it up. Like we're really a sparring partner, thought leadership partner, and we just help you get a Series A. We make introductions to investors and people that might help you along the way. So I think it's a very case by case depending on what that company needs.
Awesome. You have kind of deal experience across enterprise software through a bunch of different verticals. Is there any vertical that you're really optimistic on?
Yeah, I think what I've seen that's really interesting is the notion of a few things. I think the first is like application security, apps. And so I think we've seen the last few months, I think first of all, the pre-phase side, I think it's never been easier to build a company or build software. Now you have Claude, you have ChatGPT, but most importantly, you have like these IDEs that are basically on steroids. You would be using VS Code 5 years ago, and now you have Cursor that's able to pretty much like create most of your code base. And I think there's a statistic that says like, I think Google has like a third or 30% of their code being written by AI. I don't remember exactly the statistics, so don't quote me on that. But I think that presents a few threats and opportunities. I think on the threat side, and where this is an opportunity indirectly, is because a lot of people that are non-technical that are building products now, they don't understand necessarily the 0 to 1 process of building proper security or guardrails for creating apps. And so where this is very risky is you're essentially building platforms that are very vulnerable to attacks on the surface, but also on the app itself through like leakage of data and injections and those kind of things. And so I think because of that, and a lot of people are kind of building apps for fun, but they might be releasing these out in the wild without proper guardrails. I think there's an opportunity for companies in application security on the web, or even on mobile, to kind of help build different preventative measures to make sure these apps are well secured before they're released, and in a like layman term way. So yeah, like I would say that's one of the things I'm pretty interested in that I've come across recently. It's like as AI changes the way we do things, it's going to lead to more threats, but also going to lead to more opportunities, but it's also going to lead to a lot of vulnerabilities, kind of like the ones I mentioned.
Awesome. And to bring it back more to you, where do you see yourself 10 years? Are you still writing checks and looking at startups, or do you want to go out and build something?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've always thought about this. I could be building something. I could be joining a startup. I could stay at Panache for even longer. For me, I'm a very opportunistic person, so whatever comes to me and makes sense, I will take it. I think for me, the main thing I go about thinking about this is not like necessarily a 5-10 year horizon on a career basis. I have an idea of where I want to be financially, family-wise, and where I want to be in life. But on a more career-wise, I always think about it like, am I learning every day? Am I moving the needle in my own thought process? Am I learning from the people around me? And I think these are the most important questions to ask yourself in your career. It's not about like what's going to make most money and what's going to be a better look in terms of the job role. It's always going to be, am I learning? Am I learning at the speed that I want to, right? And so I think until I've kind of reached that, I think things might change with whatever career happens. But I could see myself eventually writing my own checks out of an angel fund I have, or SPV with a few other friends. But I would love. I think one thing for sure is I'll be in these startup innovation VC roles for a long time.
Very cool, and love that mindset. We're starting to run a little close on time. If there was kind of one thing you're going to leave with listeners that they can actually do today to start getting on this type of path, what would it be?
Yeah, my biggest advice is try to be more conscious and more intrinsically motivated when you're picking anything you do in your life. You have 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, and there's a lot of things that are going to come and want your attention. And there are a lot of things that people will tell you, your classmates, your colleagues, that you should do. But the truth is, be told, like, no one knows better than yourself of what you need to do in your career, in your life. And so try to have like this, try to always audit your why and your purpose in doing things, and don't blindly just pick something because four other people said that you should join the consulting club, right? And I'm not saying that's like a bad thing. I'm just saying like you should really be intrinsically motivated to be curious, to be driven, to work with excellent people. And so don't just choose something because it was told to you, and don't do something unless you think it's the right thing to do and you've really reflected on it. Because the most successful people I've seen in this industry or just in the world, they've all had really, really long periods of thinking of what they want to do in this world, and they haven't just picked a career path because it's like prestigious and it makes money and it looks good extrinsically. And so that's the biggest common issue I see with a lot of people, is they don't think about that and they don't really reflect on why they want to do things. It goes back to my first advice on why VC. You really need to think about that before going into it. And so I would really recommend to do that if you're a student or early in your career like me, and I'm still learning as well. That's what has worked for me, and so it might not be the ever so encompassing playbook for everyone, but I think it does work.